Hi, I'm James McGuire, editor-in-chief of eWEEK, and today we're talking about the state of online fraud and ways to fight it. We can only hope the good guys might win one of these years. To discuss that, I'm joined by Kevin Gosschalk, CEO and founder of Arkose Labs. Kevin, hello to you and happy Friday to you.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
And even in those few words, Kevin, I'm sensing there's an Aussie accent there. Is that true? If so, you're a long way from home.
I am a long way from home, it's true. So I live in San Francisco, but I'm originally from Brisbane, Queensland, in Australia.
Sure. What brought you to the U.S.?
Helping solve some fraud problems, actually. I moved my company over here. This is where we're growing our business in San Francisco. And it's actually kind of interesting. So fraudsters, one of the common tactics is always go path of least resistance. When they're trying to commit fraud, you always go after the easiest target. I
Right.
think the kind of same is true when building a high growth company. You go path of least resistance, turns out that's San Francisco. So that's kind of why,
Aha.
yeah.
Right, because the support, the funding, there's so many people to work with. Is
All the
yeah,
people you work with, the whole ecosystem is set up, and everyone is designed to help. Everyone who's succeeded here are really happy to help other companies succeed, other entrepreneurs succeed. It's actually awesome. So we're
Hmm,
super grateful to actually have the opportunity to kind of build our business here and be involved in the ecosystem here.
great. Well, let's talk about the state of the online fraud, market today. What's going on? I mean, it seems like the good guys are not winning. I'm really amazed by some of the attacks and their, it seems like here in 2021 we might have gotten it figured out, but no. So what is the state of online fraud today?
Yeah, I think it's really actually it's fascinating being in the fraud space because you gotta learn like what the attackers are doing, how they're making money from these attacks, what drives and what motivates them. As companies go more digital, you see more fraud. And there's more technology today than there's ever been in the history of the internet designed to detect and deter cyber criminals. Like there's just
Okay,
absolutely more capability than there's ever been.
right.
There's also more fraud today than there's ever been in the history of the internet. So it's kind of like we're not really winning that fight,
Mhm,
I would say. There's
mhm.
a 0% unemployment rate in the cybersecurity industry. So if anyone wants a job,
Right,
the place to
right.
be.
Sure.
But the simple reality is as long as fraudsters are making money or they believe they will make money, they will figure out a way of getting in. And
Mm.
that's really the only thing that matters. Doesn't matter what technology you have. They can social engineer people. They can do all kinds of different tactics. As long as the financials make sense, they're going to figure out a way. So, the way we like to think about it is how do we increase the cost and effort that takes away that incentive. If you can take away the financial piece, you actually see fraud start dropping off. So that's something we as an industry need to get better at.
Is it true that the fraudsters are better funded and more efficient, more professional than ever before? I mean, it seems like it's a lucrative area. It's of course, organized crime, the nation state, whoever. It's like there's a lot of resources there.
So it's actually really fascinating. The more you work in this industry, the more you kind of understand what it is that you're actually going up against. And there's not an individual. So
Right.
there might be one fraudster that's like let's talk about something simple like I don't know, like scalping PlayStation 5 consoles. So people are going
Okay.
out using bots and scripts to purchase all the consoles they can find so they can resell them on eBay. Seems like a
Right.
relatively simple kind of scheme that one person's doing from their bedroom. But
Right.
actually, what they're doing is they're procuring the software that goes and purchases those consoles from a different fraudster. So someone's job is just to make the software that does the scanning of websites
Okay.
for them to be able to use this software on these websites already have like bot mitigation defenses. So they're looking for things like fingerprints, device fingerprints, looking for like IP address information. And if they see like repeat requests from those signals, they'll block the request. Be able to get the PlayStation 5.
Right.
So they actually have to purchase proxies, IP address information. They have to make sure the software can change fingerprints. So there's quite a fair bit of complexity there. They have to buy compute, they have to get infrastructure. In some cases, it's human assisted. They might be using like bot challenge tests. So maybe they get people involved in actually reserving this inventory. So there's like a whole ecosystem. It's
Where
just
are they
evolved.
getting just to curious, where are they getting the compute and the infrastructure? Because it seems like at that point they would need to enter into the daylight to get those kind of resources. If you're going to log on to Azure and be a fraudster, I would not think so. So Where do they get the infrastructure for that?
It's true. The big cloud providers like Azure, AWS, etc., they do a good job of stopping them
Right.
from using those sort of services. So you can't.
Right.
But you'd be surprised actually how easy it is. There's a number of places I could point you that you can go that are on the public internet,
Oh,
and you can go rent infrastructure in Russia or other countries, and they really don't care what you're doing with that infrastructure. And all you're renting is just whatever compute you want to buy. It's not elastic and it's not as modern as AWS is, but it's kind of
right.
like what it used to be like before you had like an Amazon Web Service. You can go rent like a machine on a rack in some data center somewhere and just put your stuff on it, and
Right.
you can
Okay.
still do that. And they really don't care. They don't look, and it's pretty cheap, pretty
Hmm.
affordable.
What about, COVID and the pandemic? I mean, how does that impact the business of fighting online fraud? I mean, the entire world shut down there for a while, but of course the fraudsters did not shut down.
Right.
What's your take on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of interesting things that happen. So there's a lot more people online now than there's ever been. So there was
Hmm.
a drive in more good usage. And there was a requirement for a lot of businesses that weren't really taking online seriously to have to move their whole business online. So there's
Mm,
a lot of what we call is digital debutantes on the internet because of
right.
COVID. So people that have never really used the internet before now, like my parents' business is now primarily online, all these kind of things where it's just more new people to the internet that both haven't done business there before, haven't run businesses there before, really haven't used it that much.
Hmm.
And that is such a unfortunately perfect target for cyber criminals because it's an opportunity to convince people that don't really understand a lot of things that more seasoned internet users would. Certain things
Hmm.
like clicking link malware, social
Right.
engineering is a big problem.
Right.
But due to the sheer growth of people on the internet now and all the different services that are out there, e-commerce, social media platforms, et cetera, the actual return on investment for criminals went up. So before,
Mm,
let's say they were making an attack and it cost them $100 to hit 1 million people, and then they were monetizing that.
right.
Now it might only cost them $20 to hit 1 million people because there's so many more people online. So the actual attack
Mm,
surface has grown, and
right.
the cost to actually attack people has gone down,
Ah,
thanks to the sheer scale of more people being online.
okay.
And also the people that are online are more likely to be susceptible to criminal attacks.
Mm,
And the
hmm.
other factor with COVID is things like the PPP fraud, where people were waiting or expecting to get cash from the government or whatever program they might have been enrolled in, and these are people that were very vulnerable, like they are out of their
Right.
job,
Right.
and all this kind of stuff. So they're actually very susceptible to a fraudster who sends them an email saying, "Click here to claim the government financing or whatever it is, $500.
Yeah.
Just put in
Right.
your bank details and we'll wire it in
Yeah.
your account."
Yeah.
And so many people fell for that because it's just
Uh,
targeting people that are in a mode ready to kind
yeah.
of go for that sort of stuff. So there's been an
Desperate.
incredible amount of fraud in the last year, with COVID.
What about the role of artificial intelligence, and how does that play a role in online fraud? And I hope the answer is it's really playing a large role in helping to fight it. Is that true?
It is. So there is quite a lot, I would say. AI, machine learning is the big component of AI that's being used. So machine learning is pattern recognition and all the stuff that you use machines to do, search massive data sets and look for unusual activities and all that sort of stuff. So AI is absolutely a tool that is being actively deployed to do fraud mitigation. So it's already being used in the real world.
Hmm.
And it's also probably one of the more likely long-term technologies that's going to be around.
Right.
It's kind of both the yes, it's here now, kind of. I'd say
Hmm.
it's still augmenting kind of the old
Right.
way of doing things today, but I think in the future it's going to take a more central role as companies get better at it and gets more understood. Um, but we also see criminals leveraging AI as well. So
Yeah.
they're
Okay.
leveraging all the massive data sets that are out there. You can get access to very intelligent tools and capabilities through the cloud providers that you can leverage to attack companies with. So there's yeah, and unfortunately, so AI really relies on what's called as ground truth. So some signal for it to be, to train on. So it's like it needs to know when it's correct and it needs to know when it's wrong. Otherwise, it can't
Right.
really train properly. So it has to have some kind of truth or labeling source.
Right.
And for the people trying to mitigate fraud, we have to get like the customers or somebody to say, "Oh, I'm a false positive, I'm a false negative." So some kind of signal. Bad actors, unfortunately, get like the cleanest data set, because if they get blocked, they know exactly what not to do next.
Oh, yeah.
They
Okay.
have,
So they get an automatic answer.
they have an incredibly pure data set that we do not have fighting them.
Huh.
So it's
Okay.
kind of, I don't yet know what the implications of what that's going to be. I don't think they're leveraging it as well as they could, but there's no reason to say they couldn't use ML to actually bypass all fraud checks at some point in the future, because they could just rapidly test and figure out what not to do using
Hmm.
automation machines. So that's going to be interesting when that starts happening. Haven't seen that yet, but there's no reason why that won't work.
Right, right. Well, let's talk about your company, Arkose Labs. It's built, one of its products at least, is built around an alternative to captchas.
Right.
What are the details about that? How did that come about?
Yeah, so the approach Arcos takes is this idea of increasing costs and effort. So we have this, we use AI, we use machine learning data sets. We want to categorize and classify traffic. That's kind of the first job of Arcos. So do we think you're a good user when you're trying to log in? Fantastic, we let you log in. Or do we think you're a threat? Maybe it's a bot trying to do credential stuffing, which is where they used all those breached credentials from
Mhm.
the leaks that happen, fortunately, every
Constantly,
week.
yeah.
Every
Right,
week. So they test those with bots and scripts, because you're not going to do it by hand. It would take hundreds of thousands of hours to manually
right.
test millions of combinations. So they use bots
Yep.
and scripts to do that. And we classify that traffic. If we think it's automation or even like human-driven attacks, what we do is we have a challenge component. So that challenge technology is designed in the context of stopping bots. It is designed to be expensive to write software to comprehend it. So we want to force fraudsters to spend a lot of money and time trying to
Right.
attack our software, because they're not monetizing their attack against the merchants. In the context of like a human-driven attack, we work with a really large e-commerce platform in the US, and they have a credit card application process.
Hmm.
And when you get approved for the credit card, as a way of incentivizing people to sign up for this credit card, they give you a $100 gift card for their platform. So it's a
Uh-huh.
nice kind of incentive, right? Very
Right.
typical. And what fraudsters are doing is they're going and buying stolen information that you can use to sign up for a credit card with, like social, salary information, street address information, whatever you need.
Right.
And then by hand, they're opening hundreds of accounts an hour, and every
Hmm.
20 or 30 accounts, one gets approved and they make $100. So as long as the
Wow.
cost of signing up on average across 30 accounts and the labor it takes to do it is cheaper than $100, they're printing money, right?
So
So
there's a bunch of poor souls that are sitting in front of data entry terminals just typing away that
yep,
probably are not the original. They're hired by the fraudsters. It looks
that is
like, right?
exactly correct. So they give them
Yeah.
an Excel spreadsheet with all the data, and they tell them copy paste this data into here, and then we'll pay you per hour. And when you get approved, that goes to the fraudster's account over here. So the
Right.
fraudster's monetizing it, and they just have these, we call them fraud farms, which is just
Yeah.
people basically you can hire or rent
Wow.
to do
Yeah.
work for you. So that goes back to kind of the ecosystem I was describing at the start. That's another part of the ecosystem. You can just hire people to do whatever you want them to do online.
Right. Right.
And our job is just to make that whole thing uneconomical. So they use our technology
Yeah.
to increase the cost of human labor and makes that ineffective.
Hmm. Well, let's look at the future of online fraud. I mean, where do you see it going in the next few years? And in particular, what do you see as the next wave of attacks coming? And maybe most importantly, how can we prepare for it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think fraud ultimately is a bit of a symptom occurring when a bad actor is able to fake their identity or compromise someone's identity. So I kind
Hmm.
of see, a couple of years from now, we're not really going to be talking about fraud so much. We're going to be talking more about the actual root cause, which is actually at the identity level.
Hmm.
And what criminals are trying to do, they're trying to do it now. They're going to be trying to do it in a couple of years from now. Is to get access to people's accounts.
Hmm.
Pretend to be them, or do phishing or social engineering attacks to try and get into a customer accounts. And one of the big issues, frankly, is passwords, right?
Hmm.
So we have this huge reliance on something that can be very easily compromised. So there is a huge investment and push towards alternative methods of identification online. So there's things like
Hmm.
the FIDO standard, which uses biometrics. So like your phone fingerprint, you touch that instead of having to type in a password.
Hmm.
We see a lot of this on like the iOS devices. I think that they're moving the needle quite a fair bit towards a more stronger authentication future. But there's pros and cons. Like these solutions are better at mitigating certain kinds of attacks, but they're more susceptible to other kinds of attacks as well. So, I think the whole industry is trying to figure out how do we move to something that's as easy as a username and password, which in my opinion is still the easiest form of authentication. There's nothing
Right.
really quite equivalent in terms of like easy for everyone to use all at once. Doesn't
Hmm.
require like SDKs and apps to be installed, and doesn't require a specific kind of device. Anyone can use a username and password, no matter um, their capabilities or devices or whatever, right?
Hmm.
So that's a big piece of the problem, is like we just don't have good ways to authenticate people online. And that's something that criminals can take massive advantage of. And that's what we're seeing, is just this huge, a lot of the fraud problems stem from bad actors being able to compromise identity.
And the answer really is some of those newer techniques, making them widely deployed. Is that going to somehow help with the problem?
It will help. It won't necessarily solve it. Like I said earlier, there's more technology now than there's ever been. I think at
Right.
the end of the day, the real way to solve it is how do we build products that are very difficult to monetize by criminals, and that is a hard ask. There's a lot of platforms that are kind of designed to be difficult to abuse. Like,
Hmm.
you think of a product like Snapchat, it's very hard to add friends, and that's a conscious decision they made, versus an app, maybe like a Facebook, where it's much easier to add friends, and therefore it's much easier to propagate spam. It's very hard to
Right.
propagate spam in Snapchat because you can't really easily add friends.
Hmm.
So the nature of those product design actually disincentivize people attacking those products, right?
Right.
So you don't
Right.
really see the same kind of problems in a Snapchat ecosystem as you do in like a Facebook ecosystem, because they're just designed in a different way. And the same is true with like protecting like a financial institution. If you can design the product in a way that is by default very expensive to attack,
Hmm.
and you have a way of making it more expensive on them trying to get into the account, which maybe with some of those more modern standards I mentioned, as well as more difficult for them to get money out of the account. Like there's other standards being invested in around like money transfers and stuff like that.
Hmm.
That all goes to the objective of, this is not really going to be worth my time because I'm not going to make much money from it. So that's
Right.
really how the industry needs to, if they want to solve for fraud, that's really the only way that we're going to get there, is thinking about it through that lens.
Interesting. Kevin, I think you said it. Fascinating topic and well worth watching in the years ahead, no doubt. Totally appreciate you sharing expertise. Thank you very much.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Thanks, James.